My name is Monica. I'm 26 years old and work as a web designer. I grew up in a small rural town with my grandparents, parents, and younger sister, Linda. Life, however, was anything but fair. Linda, 7 years younger than me, was the center of attention, her opinions always prioritized. In contrast, I often felt overlooked and insignificant. The favoritism was blatant. On Linda's birthdays, she was showered with extravagant gifts, while my birthdays, close to Christmas, were reduced to a single occasion with practical gifts like books I had no interest in. When Linda began playing soccer, our parents enthusiastically supported her, attending every game and practice. But when I played my final tennis match in middle school, they were too busy driving Linda somewhere to come. This disparity shaped my childhood, leaving me feeling inadequate and lonely. Yet, Linda wasn't blind to the injustice. She often defended me when our parents made harsh comparisons. "Monica's good at studying and teaching, she can do anything," she'd say. After my last tennis match, Linda even handed me a small bouquet of flowers she'd picked herself, whispering, "Good job." Our grandparents also tried to advocate for me, often reprimanding my parents for their behavior. But when my grandmother passed away, followed shortly by my grandfather, any buffer against my parents' criticism vanished. Linda continued to stand up for me for a while, but as my mother began directing her harshness toward Linda too, she eventually stopped. "If you're always going to side with your sister, you might as well stand outside with her," my mother would sneer. To protect Linda, I told her to stop defending me. From then on, she focused on excelling in sports and academics, becoming the daughter our parents could proudly praise. Meanwhile, I faced the brunt of their criticism alone. After my grandparents' funerals, our family finances took a hit. My parents told me there was no money for college, crushing my dream of studying design at university. Instead, I graduated high school and took a job at a small design company far from home. Starting as an office assistant, I worked tirelessly, learning from the designers around me. My passion for web design kept me motivated, and I spent weekends taking online courses to improve my skills. 3 years later, I was promoted to the design team. 5 years after that, I became a full-fledged web designer, trusted to lead projects. During this time, I rarely returned home. Each visit only reminded me of my parents' disapproval. Instead, I poured myself into my career. 8 years after high school, I received unexpected news. Linda was preparing for university entrance exams, aiming for a prestigious medical school in the city. Despite everything, I felt proud of her. When she was accepted into her top choice school, I congratulated her warmly. "Linda, congratulations. You've worked so hard, and I admire your dedication," I told her. She thanked me, her voice tinged with embarrassment, before revealing a concern. The school suggested a donation. "It's not mandatory, but Mom and Dad are worried about how it'll look if we don't contribute. With tuition and living expenses already so high, they don't know what to do." Linda planned to cover her living expenses by working part-time, but I could see the strain medical school would impose. My parents, unable to afford the donation, had pushed Linda to ask me instead of approaching me themselves. Their audacity stunned me. Though I resented their actions, I couldn't ignore Linda's predicament. I decided to support her, covering the donation and entrance fees so she could start her new life at university. Linda moved into an apartment near campus, not far from where I lived. I hoped she'd rely on me if she needed help, but as she settled into college life, her attitude toward me shifted. Her messages grew curt. "I want to eat this or I need that, please buy it for me," she'd text, and I would arrange whatever she needed. Occasionally, we met for meals, but she was distant, often engrossed in her phone. One evening, during dinner, I tried to lighten the mood. "Mom and Dad probably only care about you," I said with a smile. Linda's expression turned cold. She snorted. Of course. A medical student like me and a high school graduate designer like you are incomparable. No one cares about a job that doesn't even need qualifications. Her words stung like a slap. There's no need to say it like that, I replied, stunned. Linda rolled her eyes. It's the truth. Being a designer is just a title. Anyone can make a website if they look it up online. You'd be better off getting a real qualification, but that's probably hard for someone who only graduated high school. I tried to defend myself. It's not that simple. I study and work hard every day. You shouldn't judge without understanding. Linda dismissed me with a displeased glance and a click of her tongue. Mom and Dad are right. They say you're a disappointment, someone who couldn't even go to college. I'm only here because they told me to watch over you, to make sure you don't sink any lower. I froze, her words hitting me like stones sinking into deep water. Memories of my parents' constant comparisons rushed back. Linda is smart, kind, and dependable, while Monica is stupid, clumsy, and useless. I lowered my head, my chest tightening as though the air had been knocked out of me. Seeing me bow my head, Linda misinterpreted my silence as shame. She smirked and added, "Well, I'm going home now," before turning briskly and leaving. Living on her own had changed Linda, surrounded by exceptional people at university and showered with praise from our parents. She had fully embraced the image of herself as the family prodigy, a future top doctor. Meanwhile, their disdain for me echoed in her tone, attitude, and dismissive behavior, as though she had absorbed their judgment entirely. That winter, I reluctantly returned home for the holidays. My parents had asked me to come back with Linda, who hadn't visited since starting university. The moment we arrived, it was clear who the focus of their attention was. The table overflowed with steak, pizza, and every imaginable treat to celebrate her visit. That evening, the house filled with neighbors, relatives, and even Linda's old classmates for a grand party. Linda basked in the attention, boasting about her life at university. "Mom keeps begging me to come home more often," she said with a laugh. "But you know how tough it is at the country's most prestigious medical school. My team projects and professors are always demanding something. It's exhausting." I busied myself in the kitchen, avoiding the spotlight, but her voice dominated every room, while my parents and relatives hung on her every word. I couldn't help but feel the strain in the neighbors' polite smiles, likely sensing the arrogance behind her boasts. When I emerged with a tray of wine, an elderly neighbor tried to shift the conversation to me. "Monica, aren't you working in design? How's that going?" Before I could answer, my parents cut in, dismissing me entirely. "Oh, there's not much to say about her," my mother said bluntly. "She's trying her best, but she didn't even go to college. Such a disappointment." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Many of those present hadn't gone to college themselves and were raising families or working tirelessly. Yet no one dared to contradict my parents. Only Linda and my parents seemed oblivious to the awkwardness, continuing as if they hadn't said something deeply insulting. Humiliated, I tried to retreat, but Linda intercepted me. "You still come home a lot, don't you, Monica? I guess you don't have much else going on, that's why you're so bold," she said, laughing loudly. My parents joined in. "If you say too much, Linda, you'll hurt her feelings," my father joked mockingly. Poor Monica. My anger boiled over. Clenching my fists, I forced out, "Maybe it's better if I don't come back next year." "I get it." The relatives and neighbors exchanged worried glances, but I ignored them. I set down the tray, grabbed my coat and bag, and headed for the door. Linda smirked as I passed her. "Fine by me. Don't bother coming back again," she said with a dismissive wave. My parents echoed her indifference. "Don't make such a big deal out of it," my father muttered. heart pounding with anger and sorrow. I stepped out into the freezing night. I didn't look back as I made my way to the station, biting back the storm of emotions swirling within me. Returning home had always been painful. In the past, I used my studies and work as an excuse to distance myself. But as I grew older, the weight of familial obligation felt harder to shake. That winter, however, Linda's cruel behavior solidified my resolve. If I truly valued my self-respect and the work I had built for myself, I couldn't keep subjecting myself to this toxicity, not even for family. Months passed after I cut ties for good. Then, one day, my phone rang. Seeing Linda's name on the screen, I hesitated before silencing the call, but she was persistent, leaving message after message, urging me to pick up. Finally, I relented and answered. "Did you pay my tuition properly?" Linda's voice carried a mixture of urgency and entitlement, as if nothing had changed. I responded calmly. "I already paid the donation and the entrance fee before you enrolled." "What about this year's tuition? The university is asking for it urgently," Linda pressed. "I don't know anything about that," I replied. Even over the phone, I could sense Linda's discomfort. I had drained my savings to cover her initial costs, the entrance fee, donation, and first year's tuition. At the time, it had nearly wiped out my finances. I'd planned to pay subsequent fees as they arose, but after the incident at the end of last year, I couldn't imagine being expected to continue supporting Linda, especially after being told not to come home. "I paid the donation because I wanted to help you," I said firmly. "Did Mom and Dad send you to an out-of-state private university knowing they couldn't afford it?" "That's not it," Linda stammered. "I have wealthy friends, so there are other expenses besides tuition and living costs. Mom and Dad somehow managed those, but now they don't have the money for tuition. That's why they told me to contact you." It all clicked. My parents had likely assumed from the start that I would shoulder the costs indefinitely. By then, I'd advanced in my career, moving to a major design firm where my skills were recognized, and my salary had significantly increased. But my financial support for Linda had always been meant as a temporary gesture, not a permanent obligation. Hearing Linda's explanation, it became clear the savings meant for her education had likely been squandered on leisure and luxuries. Despite this, I no longer had the emotional capacity to forgive. Financially, helping with her tuition wouldn't have been difficult, but emotionally, it was impossible. A few days later, my parents called, demanding I pay Linda's tuition. Their accusatory tone only deepened my resentment. It was clear they didn't see me as family, only as a source of money. Their lack of respect and consultation made compliance impossible. Linda began calling almost daily, her messages filled with self-centered pleas. "Please pay the tuition. If you don't, I'll be expelled. Scholarships and part-time jobs aren't enough. It would be such a waste if someone as promising as me had to leave school. I'll pay you back when I start working. Just help me as family." She even left absurd messages like, "If you're upset because they told you not to come home, I can try persuading Mom and Dad." I saved her voicemails in a separate folder, deleted everything else, and blocked her number. No one deserves to be treated as a doormat just because they're family. After that, I cut off all communication with them. A relative later told me that Linda managed to secure scholarships and loans to cover her second year's tuition. However, without financial support for her living expenses, she took on part-time work. Balancing her studies and work proved too difficult, and she ended up failing several courses. Eventually, Linda dropped out of university altogether. With no other options, she returned to live with our parents. Their finances drained, they couldn't afford to transfer her to another school. Linda didn't seek local work either. Instead, she became reclusive, spending her days playing video games and lashing out in fits of stress at night. A friend who lived nearby told me later that family arguments could be heard regularly from their house. My parents, once so proud of Linda, seemed powerless to confront her. As time went on, things worsened. My father, under immense stress, caused a scandal while commuting to work. He was accused of groping a woman on the train. Though the case was settled without charges, he resigned in disgrace. My mother, with little work experience, struggled to find a job that could sustain the family. Occasionally, they tried to contact me through relatives, but their messages were always the same, demanding and unapologetic. Eventually, even the relatives lost patience. "We'll handle it here, don't worry," they told me, cutting off further attempts at communication. I later heard through the grapevine that Linda and my father, both unemployed, were living in near destitution. My mother, frustrated and overwhelmed, had disappeared entirely, leaving them to fend for themselves. With no goodwill left in the neighborhood, there was no help from others. Meanwhile, my life had taken a different path. My career as a designer flourished. I was invited to join a major project that would leave my name recognized in the industry. With the project wrapping up and my savings secure, I decided to pursue a long-held dream, taking university entrance exams. Now, I plan to study business management with the goal of eventually going independent. For the first time in years, my heart is racing with excitement for the challenges ahead.